This is a sequel to a book that I'd written, Managing Ignatius. And Managing Ignatius takes Lucky Dogs from 1947 until 1998. This takes it from 1997 to the present. I've managed Lucky Dogs for 40 years. I never intended to manage a company that had 10-foot-long hot dog carts that was on Bourbon Street. My goal was to be an historian. I studied under Stephen Ambrose at the University of New Orleans. And then he recommended that I come to LSU in Baton Rouge and study under T. Harry Williams, which I did for a year. Then I went back and finished my master's thesis under Steve at UNO. It's only because of Steve that I wrote any of the 3 books that I've written. He suggested that I turn my master's thesis into a book on Higgins, which I did. And then after that came out, he called me one day at home and said, "Are you writing anything?" I said, "Well, I've jotted down a few notes on Lucky Dogs." And let me explain something first, I guess. When I was in high school, I started working for Lucky. I started working for Orange Julius. Doug Talbot owned it. In 1970, when I graduated from high school, Doug sold Orange Julius, and he bought Lucky Dogs. So during college, as an undergraduate, from 70 to 74, I worked with him part-time and holidays, helped him out around the warehouse. And then during my master's thesis years, I also worked part-time, did catering events with him. And that's how I got involved in Lucky Dogs. So later, when I decided I was going to go for a doctorate, Tulane offered me a fellowship. I had a room in the library, I had books, tuition, and they paid me $300 a month just to go to school. But I burned out. I was reading, and I couldn't retain anything that I was reading. So I decided, you know, it's best, maybe this isn't what I'm meant to do. So I resigned from Tulane, and Doug called and asked me if I would help him train a night manager at Lucky Dogs. And I said, sure, you know, I'd be happy to do that. We thought it'd be about 2 weeks. Well, that gentleman didn't work out, then I tried to train someone else for him, and that gentleman didn't work out, and weeks turned into months, and months turned into decades, and after 40 years, I'm still here. It's probably where I was meant to be. I probably was not meant to be in a classroom, frankly. I've enjoyed my 40 years at Lucky Dogs. I can tell you this, it's a lot more fun looking back on something 10 years later than it is looking at it at the moment that it's happening. It's never nearly as fun in that moment, but when you go back and look back, it is a lot of fun. This book is really kind of 3 books in one. The first 1/3 of the book deals with Lucky Dogs operating in Beijing, China. And I know this seems kind of strange, but we went to China, and we were a certified company in the People's Republic of China. We were so small that we got in under the radar. Burger King was still trying to figure out how to get in, and we had our license. You have to be approved by 28 different departments, and they have to stamp your application, and they rubber stamp it physically. And if any one of those 28 departments decides not to stamp your application, you do not get a license. Now, what happens a lot of times, if a big corporation, let's say that manufactures turbine engines, doesn't want competition to come in, their minority partner makes sure that that application somehow gets lost along the way. And it could take years for them to finally get an application. So you never really get denied in China. You just get lost in the bureaucracy of China. But we were so small, no one feared us. They let us in. They did charge us a 47% value-added tax to ship a cart into China. So there is no fair playing field in China. Trust me, it's not fair at all. We had a minority partner. I'll call her Lynn. And you're only as strong in China as your minority partner, because it's the Communist Party that gives you the license to operate. So you need someone who's high enough up in the party, at least locally, to protect you. And Lynn was pretty good at that. But things that were promised when we went over never developed, because as long as we were hypothetical or theoretical, no one feared us. Once we got there with a cart, then maybe the local mayor or the local police department, they all had their own license to have vending carts, and we were then going to take money out of their pocket, and doors that were once open suddenly closed. A few things about China. First off, they didn't know if the cart was fast food or a missile. They really weren't sure what it was. You know, when they saw it. Over here, hot dogs are an impulse item. We were trying to sell hot dogs to a non-impulsive people. That was another problem. The other thing in China, when I went there in '98, it was the one child, in the major cities, the one child rule. So you had two sets of grandparents, one child, one grandchild. They would all go in their Sunday best to McDonald's, because that was a huge thing back then. And they would take family portraits around the Ronald McDonald statue. And the lines getting into Kentucky Fried Chicken were 4 or 5 across and 150 deep out the door and around the block. So the thing about Western fast food was the people wanted to buy it, and then they wanted to walk and sit right by the window and eat, so that everyone on the outside would know that they were affluent enough to purchase Western fast food. We were giving them a grab-and-go item that just didn't, it didn't give them what they needed. So we were up against that. And then street vending in China generally is a very poor product, which brings us to the point of trying to find a hot dog in China. We went to several places. We ended up going to a place about 75 miles outside of Beijing. And the interesting thing, when you get about 15 or 20 miles outside of the outer ring of the city of Beijing, we're riding in our minority partner's brand new BMW, and we're passing fields, and there are people in those fields that have wooden ox carts that they're pulling themselves, or lifting and rolling themselves, and they have sticks on top of it, or maybe there's produce on top of it. We're going down the highway 65, 70 miles an hour, and the people in the fields don't even know the Industrial Revolution ever occurred. It's totally different. We got to the warehouse, and it was a cinder block building that looked like it was built in the 1940s. It was only about 5 years old, but it looked very old already. We were not able to go in and view the plant until lunchtime because they wanted to clean everything up. There was myself, and there's a young man from New Orleans who spoke fluent Mandarin Chinese. And he's a young Jewish individual in his late 20s, and I'll call him Matt. Because Matt's now in investment banking in New York, so we'll just keep him as Matt. We went here, and since we were Westerners, they wanted to put their best foot forward. They showed us the plant. It was all cleaned up. They showed us the plant. Then they took us to a room, maybe about 10 times the size of this one, where all of the plant workers ate. It looked like an old military type of mess hall. And then there was a small room with one round table in it, and we went in there and ate. And they put everything that they made on this giant Lazy Susan. And you're supposed to taste a piece of each. Well, prior to tasting it, there was a gentleman sitting to my left that was a local historian. And I think he probably saw China from the day God created it to that point. It's what he looked like, the long beard, the wrinkled face. And he went into a 45-minute discussion of China's 4,000-year history. And then he turns to me and through his interpreter says, "Tell us about your country's history." So, I knew what the game was at this point. So I told him, I said, our country is only 200 years old. We truly don't have a history. What we have is a record of current events. So they all kind of like that. And then there was one real young guy that you really could hate. And he was sitting across from me. And he was a young plant officer. And he was there to drink. You could tell why he was there. He would make a toast every time. Ganbei, Ganbei, bottoms up. I don't drink. I'm not opposed to drinking, but a long time ago, I decided if I was going to work in the quarter, I had to know that I was going to work and not party. So I've been able to keep the two separate. I drank more alcohol that day than I probably drank in the previous 15 years. But I wasn't going to let them get over it. And that wasn't bad. Their warm beer wasn't really bad. It wasn't very strong. But then they went to something, I think it's called Beijing, or it's a Chinese green rice whiskey. And Matt told me, he said, "Jerry, don't look at it, don't smell it, don't sip it, drink it in one gulp, and leave it at that." So I did. And they did that about 4 or 5 times. And finally the plant manager says, let's just have the meal. The guy, he wasn't quite done yet. He wanted to get one last dig in. And he told us, he said, "The best drinkers I know of are the Russians." He said, the Russians know how to drink. And I thought, give me your best Russian, and I'll take any one of the guys I've got in my warehouse selling Lucky Dogs in a quarter, and I'll put everything on a one-on-one, because my guy, I'll drink them under the table. And in China, I wondered at the end of that, a lot of them have beds in their offices, and that's because once they leave the dinner, they go back and take a nap. Well, I wondered, how could you possibly do business this way? You're allowed to bring a designated drinker. Now, over here we have designated drivers. But in China, you could bring a designated drinker, which I really thought, boy, would the Lucky Dog guys love this. They could go in and drink free and get paid. They'd all be jumping on Chinese ships. I mean, so it's a whole different culture. They take their birds for a walk in the afternoon in a cage. It's a lot different than here. We had a young gentleman that worked for us. His name was Dagao, big boy. He was 15. Nice kid. We discovered the ramifications of certain things in China's culture are much different than here. Matt caught Big Boy stealing some money. It wasn't much, but in his eyes, it was huge. I mean, what we considered a few dollars, they considered to be wealth. Well, it probably totaled $15. His mother was actually our accountant, who had been recommended to us by the Bank of China. You have to have a Chinese accountant to keep the books. Nice lady. She knew how to work the Chinese system. My dream would be to see her run against Edwin Edwards in politics. She was that good. I mean, she knew exactly how to manipulate everything. But when she discovered that her son had stolen $15, we said, look, it's not a big deal. She said, oh, yes, it is. The next day, he will join the army. The next day, she had him in the military. And we said, I think you're overreacting here. She said, no, you do not understand. In China, it's our retirement, my retirement. We have one child. We have no other retirement. The child takes care of the parents in old age. And if he goes bad and has no future, then I have no future. She was actually thrilled that this occurred at such a young age, where she could turn him around. It's a completely different world. The other thing, the day we opened, and that was at 3:30 p.m. on July 25th, 1997, there was a young girl there that Matt knew. She was home visiting her grandparents. Her parents had moved from China when she was about 5 years old. She went through schools in the U.S. She was at Harvard at that point in time. Beautiful girl. Could have been an actress, could have been a model, spoke fluent Chinese, fluent American. And she understood both systems because she would spend summers with her grandmother. And she said the Chinese people really do not understand any type of bonus situation, which we had implemented. And we would give them free meals for lunch and all. She said there's 5 or 6 people doing one job. And since there's so many people doing one job, no one wants to do the job. They expect the other person to do the job. So in about 15 to 20 minutes, she explained the entire bonus situation to our employees. And she also explained to them that they need to smile. Because a lot of the Chinese people, when you go buy something, they never smile. So in 15 minutes, we had the most aggressive smiling group of probably service counter people that there were in China. It was an interesting place to be. But in the end, we realized if we were going to compete, we had to go ahead and build brick and mortar buildings and put an awful lot of money in. We couldn't do that because there was no patent protection in China. The second third of the book is Katrina. And I'll quickly go through this because I'll give you a little H3. Katrina was a strange situation. After Katrina, it was a problem of finding labor. And in New Orleans, the prime quality after Katrina that you could look for in a potential employee was that they were breathing. If they breathed, that was about it. I mean, that's about all you could hope for. McDonald's was giving $500 bonuses to sign up. So was Burger King. It's hard to compete against that. People had no place to live. All of the insurance adjusters, all of the construction people had rented everything. There was no place for your workforce to come back to live. So we instituted kind of survivor lucky dogs. I took the second floor of our building, I turned it into a bunkhouse. We have a walk-in cooler, we have showers, we have washer and dryer, so I gave them a place to live. We had 13 vendors went out the night before Katrina struck. 12 of them returned. 2 ended up riding bicycles from Pensacola to Slidell, discovered the bridge was out. They rode I-12 to Baton Rouge and then went down Airline Highway to come to our plant so that they could go out. We opened the Mardi Gras after Katrina, the first Mardi Gras. We had one guy, his name was Shadowhawk, that we hired. And he was breathing, so we decided to give him a chance. It didn't take long to discover that he was not going to work out. Shadowhawk was supposedly his American Indian name. I don't even know if he was American Indian. But I went to work one day, and as I'm walking from my parking garage at the Whitney around the corner on Gravity to our warehouse, there's this young kid, probably in his early 20s, flying like a gazelle past me. And here comes Shadowhawk with what looked like a samurai sword. And they run down Camp Street about a block, and they turn, and they're coming back toward me. And I let the young kid go by, then I jumped in front of Shadowhawk and said, look, whoa, stop. You know, first off, I'm sure even in post-Katrina, excuse me, decapitations are still illegal. And I know, in fact, at Lucky Dogs, we do not allow people to be decapitated. So, by now, he couldn't chase the kid anyway. He was totally out of breath. The sword was hanging by his side. I don't know where he got the sword. I took the sword from him, and at that moment I made a corporate judgment decision. I said, Shadow, if you could be anywhere in the world right now, where would you be? He said, Orlando. I said, that's the magic word. Hop in the truck. I took him from there to the bus station, and I bought him a ticket to Orlando, and I thought, sorry, Mickey, but you know, that was like good government, good business, self-preservation, all at one thing. And it didn't cost much, a one-way ticket. He couldn't turn it in. He had to leave. But I knew before long he would end up getting in trouble. The bulk of the people that came back were all very good workers. At Survivor Lucky Dogs, if someone posed a problem, they were all living together, they could vote them out of the warehouse. So everybody kind of, I let them self-regulate. They could work when they wanted to work, or they didn't have to work if they didn't want to work, because there was not a lot of business on the street. So it wouldn't have done well to have 10 or 15 vendors out when the business wasn't there. The business was there on Friday nights and Saturday nights when the construction workers were off, when there were more National Guard people who were off. It took a long time to recover, and you had to do things differently than you ever did before, and kind of work in conjunction more with the vendors, and because you really couldn't fire them. The other thing is, you couldn't smoke in the shop, you couldn't drink in the shop. I had a whole bunch of set of rules, but I would always call them to let them know, hey, how did last night go? I'm on my way in. I didn't want to catch them doing something where I would have to run them out. So, you know, it was like the cat and the mouse, but the cat, you know, was telling the mouse, I'm coming. So generally it worked. It worked well, and we were able to get back to normal, where everyone moved out of the warehouse, could find proper living, and the business could go back to the way it was before. I went in, my wife Jane and I drove down about 4 days after Katrina, because I had 5 people that rode out Katrina in our shop. 3 had already left, there were 2 remaining. One guy that was there, his name was Carl. Carl had worked for us a long time ago. He wasn't working for us now, but he asked if he could stay there and ride out the storm. We're in the central business district. We have bigger buildings around us. We have 3 floors. We have the walk-in cooler, we have hot dogs, we have soft drinks, we have water. So I knew they would be fine. I tried to get them to leave town, but they refused. So our place was better than the rooming houses they were living in, so I let them stay there. Well, Carl belonged back in the 1800s. He did not belong in today's society. He was working on tugboats at the time. He came to Lucky Dogs to see some of the other guys, and they said, why don't you stay with us? He said, okay. Well, he discovered inside the warehouse, our night manager had a Bowie knife that he brought when he was evacuating, and he forgot it there instead of taking it with him. Carl found this Bowie knife. You had some roaming bands of unsavory characters after Katrina. Some broke into the restaurant at the corner and totally messed that up, tried to break into the bar across the street. And they would come to Lucky Dogs and they would say, you know, we're going to come in and take what we want. And the other vendors told me that were there. The reason they didn't come in is Carl stood at the door with the Bowie knife. And he said, I can't get you all, but I can get some of you. I'm not afraid to die, are you? And they all said like, whoa, this guy's nuts. You know, we'll go find some other place. And it's because of Carl. Well, I went back and rescued Carl and Jack right after Katrina. And the police wouldn't let me in. We had 50 propane tanks in our building. And I wanted to make sure the building was locked and secure so that nothing happened to those tanks or the entire block that we're located on. I was on West Bank Expressway trying to get to New Orleans to rescue them. There was a police officer right there at the barricade. And, you know, like everyone else in New Orleans, the chances are good he may have lost everything he owned or may have lost family members even. And he was in no mood to discuss anything. So when I pulled up, I tried to explain to him about the propane tanks, the two guys I wanted to rescue. He said, they're going to be okay. Nobody's going to mess with the tanks. I said, look, I really don't want to be the new Mrs. O'Leary's cow, which is what caused Chicago to burn. And he looked at me and he said, I don't know any Mrs. O'Leary, and I don't know anything about a cow. Turn around and go the other way. So later, using a pass that belonged to a relative who did not need it to go downtown anymore, he was supposed to deliver some food to the police department that one of the other people in this company did. So he had this pass, and he lent it to me. And I went in and I rescued those two guys and then took them to the airport. And then locked up Lucky Dogs and made sure that it was totally clean and locked. Time-wise, post-Katrina. One of the story, the kind of guys we work with, Nick, nice guy, trustworthy. When he's sober, he's a great worker. He doesn't get real drunk, but he gets a little tipsy. Some days he works, some days he doesn't. And he would just clean up around the shop and help around there. Well, Mardi Gras, I needed Nick. I needed him bad to help clean up. You can never have enough help. And he was supposed to be sweeping the shop. And he did a great job until about 12 o'clock. And he disappeared. No one knew what happened. Later on, he comes back. And I discovered he had been up on St. Charles Avenue near Lee Circle at a family reunion, sitting there eating and drinking and watching the parades and enjoying the day with all of the relatives until someone said, wait a minute, we don't have a cousin Nick. and two of his far distant cousins ended up chasing him halfway down St. Charles Avenue. And when he got back, he said, you know, Aunt Bessie sure cooks some great fried chicken. And that's the kind of character. And then there's Schmitty. Schmitty one day showed up at the shop. They called and said, Jerry, you need to see Schmitty. You need to talk to him. I said, send him upstairs. And he walks in. Schmitty's worked for us since the 80s. And he's a very nice guy. He is, let's say, challenged in certain areas. He reads a lot, but he went from foster home to foster home to foster home. So I don't think he ever really got someone who mentored him or took care of him and explained all the facts of life to him. Schmitty walks in, and he has high heels on. He has a mini skirt on. He has a frilly blouse on. And a wig. And he said, they tell me you're not going to let me push your cart out like this. I said, well, I'm not. He said, that's because I'm a guy, not a girl. I said, no, I have no problem with that, Smitty. I said, there's two major concerns I have. One, the high heels will not give you enough traction to push a cart. And two, we follow the Catholic school dress code. I said, if you kneel down and that skirt touches the floor, I promise you, you can wear it. If it doesn't, you have to go home and change. And he knelt down in front of my desk, and I could see him. He went, damn! He missed it by about that much. He went home, and he came back in old cowboy boots, blue jeans. He looked more like Roy Rogers instead of Dale Evans. So you never know what's going to happen down there. Anyone have any questions? It's it. Lucky Dogs, if you think of the sitcom Taxi, but replace the taxis with hot dog carts and take them out of New York and put them in New Orleans, that's what I face every day. It's funny looking back, not always funny at the day it occurs. And I will say this about the vendors. One, it may be one of the most dangerous jobs in New Orleans. Everyone on the street knows you're handling cash. And when you're pushing the cart in, your back is turned. So it's very dangerous. The second thing is, none of these people are standing in line looking for welfare, for a check from the government. They're working, and they'll work in the heat, the rain, the cold. Now, they can come and go as they want. There's no set hours, there's no set days. But all of them have enough work ethic to want to work, which I give them credit for a lot in that sense. They're good people who sometimes make bad decisions. Yes?
How much does a hot dog cost?
It's a jumbo is $5.75, a regular is $4.75. That's tax included and everything you want on it. So part of the problem is the insurance that we have to carry in the quarter is tremendous with all that propane.
Why China?
Same thing we ask ourselves. No. Well, I once took a cart to Martinique. I took a cart to Canada. Canada didn't work because that was going to be with a gentleman who developed shopping centers, and he wanted to operate and be the franchisee for everything from coast to coast. And his other people that he was renting space to in his mall said, wait a minute, if you're going to compete against the food court, maybe it'll be the dress shops next and the shoe shops. So he backed off of that deal. Martinique didn't work for a lot of reasons. China was because of Matt, who lived in New Orleans, who went to China thinking he had a job with the State Department and wasn't there when he graduated from Boston College. And in order to stay in China, you have to have full-time employment. So he said, why not bring hot dog carts over? He saw the other fast food. We got into China. I think we've set a record in China. It cost us a total of $37,000 to build a cart, to send a cart to China, to open up in China, to operate in China, to cover my expenses to and from several times in China, and to ship the cart back. I mean, we operated bare bones, and we did it with the one cart, and it told us that our method here really would not be conducive to operating there.
And what about the carts? Where do they come from? Who makes those carts?
Little elves. No. They're actually made by Quality Metal now in Elmwood. It costs $35,000 to make a Lucky Dog cart. Because each part's made individually. If you can mass produce parts, that would be fine. But I think I'm taking up probably someone else's time. Oh, no, two more minutes? Okay.
I just was wondering, could you see Lucky Dog, maybe it is, in another U.S. city?
We operated in Baltimore, at the Baltimore-Washington International Airport for 5 years until they tore the part of the concourse down in Southwest where we were. And then they wanted us to go inline. And going in line was going to cost too much. I could not see financially how we could recoup that investment. There really, I don't know that there's another place Lucky Dog would work well. French Quarters, maybe Greenwich Village, but French Quarters, there's very few. Then you'd be up against the restaurant associations there. I can't tell you how many times people buy a building behind us and then say, hey, look, we'd like you to move the cart. Unfortunately, we're legal here. We were here when you looked at the building. And we get along with basically everyone in the quarter. But it would be hard to move into another city. We tried Washington, D.C., and I was threatened on every corner. But that's in Managing Ignatius. That story's in there.
So you're still doing Lucky Dogs?
Yes.
So where the book that you had out?
The previous book was called Managing Ignatius.
Yeah, great title.
Yeah, I
Yes.
liked it.
It was great.
And let me tell you, Ignatius wouldn't even be one of the stranger people. I will end on this. Big Tiny works for me now. Nice guy. About 6'8", weighs 390 pounds. He and Steve's 6'10", looks like he should play for the Saints. He's probably better than anybody the Saints have. They decided to go to Montana and work in the oil fields. They got up there and discovered this was like the old company store. They paid you a lot of money, but it cost you $15 for eggs. So they decided to come back. And they were broke. So they called me one day and said, Jerry, we would like to come back to New Orleans, but we're heavy equipment operators. I can't promise you we're going to work for you, but we really need bus tickets. I took out my credit card. I got them 2 bus tickets. I said, come on back. Just pay me when you get a chance. And if you work for us on weekends or something, that's fine. You're not obligated. So they came back. Tiny walks into my office one day. Now, Tiny had been shot in the head when he was a child by accident. It saved his life because he had a brain tumor, and they discovered that. But his mother claimed that she thinks they removed the brain and left the tumor. Tiny went to jail, and he has Aryan Nation tattoos on him. But he said, Jerry, had I not come to Lucky Dogs, I would have died a racist. But since I came here, I discovered he got to work with a lot of the black vendors we have. He got to work with the black doorman on the corners that was behind him. And it opened his eyes to a lot of things he'd never seen before. But when he comes back from the oil field, he walks in, he said, you know, I liked you before, but I really like you now. He said, you didn't have to do what you did because you knew we weren't necessarily going to work for you. He said, is there anything I can do for you? I said, no, Tiny, everything's okay. He said, you need anybody beat up? I said, no. I said, no, Tiny, I'm good, but I'll keep that in the back pocket. If there's anybody, you'll be the first one, I'll give you a call. I don't think he really meant it, but it was just more goodwill. Well, thank you all very much for coming.